Warning: this video may contain spoilers for the following listed books and series. If you have not read any of these books or series and do not wish to be spoiled, then I recommend going and reading those and then coming back. If, however, you've read these or really just don't care about spoilers, feel free to carry on. Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today, I want to talk about revolution stories. Now, I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned it here, but I'm a sucker for a good revolution story. But at the same time, I can be super picky about them. It's kind of like what I've said about thrillers. I love them in theory, but not often in execution. I've had people tell me it's a sign of pretentiousness. Maybe it is. But I like to think that it's more than that. Because I love this type of story and so frequently seek them out, I hold these stories to a slightly higher standard. I expect something more for them, especially when I read stories that feature revolution and, in my own humble opinion, do it absurdly well. See, I don't just want a story that has a revolution and the only message is that dictatorial government is bad and freedom fighters are good. Then again, I am all about that Star Wars life, so maybe sometimes this simplicity is good for a revolution story. But in general, I want something more complex, because at the end of these stories, I'm left asking, okay, what else? Dictatorial government bad, freedom fighters good is just too simplistic, borderline unrealistic at times, because it's too black and white. After all, remember what Sirius Black told Harry Potter in The Order of the Phoenix. The world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. We've all got both light and dark inside us. What matters is the part we choose to act on. That's who we really are. Now, sure, since we're on the topic, Voldemort in the Harry Potter series comes across as essentially an embodiment of evil, as explained through a lack of empathy and love for other human beings, especially those perceived as other and therefore weak. On the surface, he's very simple. He's bad with nothing redeemable about him. And yes, I'll agree, this is very true. But when you extrapolate his backstory in Half-Blood Prince, you start to realize that his evil is a reaction to what I'd argue is ultimately self-loathing. Creating Horcruxes is a form of self-harm. He's deliberately ripping his soul into pieces and storing them outside of himself. He's trying to become pure evil, a creature without sympathy and empathy, so that he can achieve what he sees as strong. Muggles and Muggle-borns are the subject of his rage because of his own personal history of his father being a Muggle-born and rejecting his mother once no longer under the effects of a love potion, aka the magical form of a date rape drug. Though for the record, since we're also on the topic, I in no way condone the stuff that Voldemort does in the Harry Potter series. And the revolution of Harry Potter doesn't seek to fully upend a system. It seeks to take down a person, the ideas he represents, and would ultimately reflect the pervasive injustices and prejudices that already exist within the wizarding world. It's not about upending the government. The Ministry of Magic ultimately stays in place, but with better people at its head, and the dark undercurrents that were corrupting and poisoning it removed. When the Second Order of the Phoenix was congregating together, and when the students were still going through Hogwarts, there was thought about what would happen next. Who would make a good new Minister of Magic? What do Ron and Harry and Hermione wish to do once they are adults and no longer students? These questions might sound a little mundane to some, or even a bit like busy work, but it's that same busy work that helps a revolution upon success to remain a success afterwards. But not only that, it's also built upon compromise. Again, they don't completely destroy the Ministry of Magic, they just get a new minister in there. A lot of the systems that are already in place remain in place, but the rules and the prejudices and the attitudes towards non-wizards, those are what need to be fixed. And this is why when reading or even watching a revolution story, I love it when they, in some way, ask and address what I think is probably the biggest and most important fundamental question. What do you do after revolution? You've heard me mention Red Rising a lot on this channel, because those books are amazing and you should all go read them. And as a saga about revolution, I think that Pierce Brown did some amazing fucking things in crafting the trajectories of each character on both sides of the board. But even more than that, I think he did stellar work with the questions that the trilogy asked, one of them being that big one. What happens after you break the Empire? Well, if you were to ask Pierce Brown, he'd tell you. You break an empire, you bloody damn buy it. Thank you. I call this a fundamental question because I think it is the core of a revolution, and it's one that we're taught at a young age, just oftentimes in more simplistic terms. You don't like something? Fine. If you turn in a paper that just says you don't like something, what is that? Like a C grade in school. don't like something, back it up with facts, and have a plan to change it, suddenly you're looking at an A grade, and people are now listening. And yet this fundamental question is one that I think a revolution story, especially in the world of young adult dystopia fiction, misses. If you were to pick the poster child for the YA dystopia revolution, I'd wager that most people would point to The Hunger Games. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't like the Hunger Games book series. I do think, however, the films are at the very least watchable and elevated from their source material thanks to the cast and their performances, but as for the books, yeah, I've got some gripes and I'd rather never read them again. The books depend upon your righteous indignation at the idea of sacrificing young children in a killing game that is made into countrywide entertainment. Good, great. What else? You see, the books never give you any more than a show of gross consumerism and the obvious bad guy of dictatorial leader President Snow to show you what the society is and why it needs to be entirely dismantled. Yes, it's obviously wrong, but what else? How are you going to fix it after you decide to break it? In my opinion, Collins never answers this question or even goes into the deep mechanics of how her world functions. We just see the districts. We're not really told how they work. Because of that, by the time you get to the third novel, Mockingjay, the biggest question of what happens after revolution cannot be, and more importantly, is not properly addressed. Because the only answer is, President Snow will be dead. Great. What was the plan for piecing the world of Panem back together after a violent civil war and brutal upheaval of the government? Oh wait, that's right. There is no plan. Or if there is, Collins can claim that Katniss is not involved in any of these conversations, so why should she have to answer these in the narrative? And I get that Katniss has this whole over-reluctant hero thing going on, but any person with even a single brain cell in their head would ask what was going on if they were asked to become a symbol of some sort of revolution, wouldn't they? I'm just saying, if you want me to be your poster child, I want to know everything about you. By not even bothering to address this question, I have to be honest and say that Katniss came off as no better than the people of the Capitol, blindly putting faith in the people of power in District 13. She did everything they said without fail because it was righteous. And after realizing that, shocker, she had been lied to, she killed that leader. What happened that day in the Capitol? What was the plan to rebuild the world that the rebels in the Capitol literally blew to fucking hell and back? Apparently something, because all those years later, Katniss and Peeta are living in wedded bliss. But I'm still left wondering how. This is why I love Red Rising. Not only does one of the characters, all hail Mustang, the fucking queen that she is, actually ask this question of, what do we do after revolution? After we break everything, what can we build? In the series proper, to the protagonist, but she recognizes the need for compromise at the end of the whole shebang. In the same way that Harry Potter didn't dismantle its government, Mustang comes in and says, we need to make some changes, but some things should probably stay in place. The entire revolution of the Red Rising series is messy. Supremely messy. And a lot of people die. Everyone comes out changed. Shit gets done, shit gets broken, and they have a plan for what to do after. Or if not, they know they're going to have to struggle and do all of the grunt work to make sure that the revolution is ultimately a success. Of course, Pierce Brown is getting the benefit of a sequel trilogy, Iron Gold, which he's currently penning that will, as noted in that earlier tweet, show the difficulty of piecing together an interplanetary empire that has been broken by revolution. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that revolution is never necessary. Like I said, I love revolution stories. And I live in a country that was born from a revolution. Revolution plays a role in shaping the world. And in fiction, you are often introduced to a world that needs to be changed and reshaped. But you should have a plan and make sure the reader understands what that plan is. Revolution is not as easy as just dismantling everything. Part of my family is French. Look at that country, forever shaped by a revolution. We don't talk about the French Revolution really as that much of a success. Instead, all we think is the bloody reign of terror and the rise of Napoleon, and great, they're back to a new dictator. Contrasting that with the American Revolution, the people we call the Founding Fathers had started calculating what they would do afterwards, and when they disagreed with each other, they tried to form compromises. There was so much debate over what the nation would look like after the fighting was done. And sure, the results of revolution are still rocky. We just went through what could probably be called one of the ugliest election cycles in our history. It's certainly the ugliest that I've witnessed in the admittedly short years I've been here on this planet, and even shorter years I've been aware of the political process. Oftentimes fiction is seen as escapism, which is probably why the impulse to write very easy black and white revolution stories that magically come together with a bow on top at the end is tempting. But I personally much prefer the revolution stories where it's actually a little more complex. It's not as easy to just say, bad guys, good guys, go for it. I prefer something like Red Rising, where I find every character on the board interesting, and I like and dislike things about both of them. Sometimes there are obvious villains, but they're not often the main players. The main players are still very complex, and sometimes you might see why maybe they should stay around, or at least why the system doesn't necessarily need to be changed entirely. Perhaps it's just the pervasive prejudice that exists within the attitudes of the society that needs to be changed, more than the structure of the government. But when it comes to fiction, if you're gonna give me a revolution story, and you're gonna break the empire, you bloody damn well buy it. That's it for me today, you guys, so until next time, cheers.